Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Can I welcome you to the stage? Yes, I've never done that before. This is Nancy. You might know her.
Let's have a round of applause for Gregory Rollins. Okay, great. So I'm Nancy Knowles. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad you're here tonight in celebration of the storytelling event. We're here for setting the table, a community conversation about food as identity, scarcity, beauty, business, and healing. And we've got a great lineup of storytellers tonight. I'm a faculty member at EOU and I'm an ACE board member, and I am collaborating with Laura Hudson here, who's the pastor of the First Presbyterian Church and also the proprietor of Resilient Spirit, an organization oriented toward using stories to rewrite our lives. And we're being aided by Corey Brewster in the back, who's running our Zoom and taking care of our folks online as they show up. So I just want to say a few words about Art Center East. It was founded in 1977 as Eastern Oregon Regional Arts Council, and it's a 501c3 nonprofit that focuses on arts exhibition, marketing, and learning opportunities in the Carnegie Library building here in La Grande. Arts Center East also provides private music lessons and music ensembles in partnership with EOU, and arts learning for rural schools in our 10-county region. Tonight's event is supported by the Oregon Humanities, and any cash and food donations will go toward the COFA Alliance National Network, Community Connection, the Farmers Market, and Haven from Hunger, all organizations oriented toward food issues here locally. In gathering here tonight, we recognize that we all live and work on Indigenous homelands. Specifically, Arts Center East and its programs reside on the ancestral homelands of the Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, and Nez Perce peoples. We respect our Indigenous neighbors' resiliency, reciprocity with the natural world, and infusion of arts into traditional lifeways. Tonight's event features the music of Gregory Rollins and also stories by Colette Marie, Anna Kreutz, Carrie Castleton Lau, Robin Maley, and Merlin Baker. We'll also be featuring Candy Nielsen, who will be talking with us a little bit about the La Grande Farmers Market. And there'll be an intermission after the first three storytellers. So there's an opportunity to refill your glasses if you like. And I'll just invite the storytellers to introduce themselves to you as they begin their stories. So our first storyteller tonight is Colette Marie.
Can you hear me? So my name's Colette, and I am a student in the MFA program at Eastern Oregon University. I'm delighted to be here. It's always fun to come and read. As a former social worker for 35 years in Boulder County, Colorado, I love that this is a benefit for food. The importance of feeding people and food justice is something that's very near and dear to my heart. So my story tonight is something that I wrote about a year ago in a class with Corey. It's called Chocolate Chip Cookies Meet Doctors Without Borders. I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house during my childhood. They lived in Buckley, a small town at the base of Mount Rainier, in the same house where my mother and her two older sisters grew up. They kept chickens, a cow, and a vegetable garden. My Nana, Mom, and aunties did all the cooking, baking, canning, freezing, and preserving of food, something my papa treated with great respect and gratitude, even reverence, reminding me, my brothers and cousins, that we were fortunate to have enough to eat, to have women in the family who knew how to grow, cook, and preserve food, and who worked hard so that we were assured we would have plenty through the winter. though I never knew a winter or any other time when we didn't have plenty of food lined up on pantry shelves, neatly stacked in a big freezer in our garage, and bags full of groceries to unpack from the store. My papa's inability to take food for granted made an impression on me, especially when he would gaze and smile at new jars of canned peaches lined up on the pantry shelf, or a loaf of bread cooling on a rack, warm cookies, his favorite, stacked on a plate on the kitchen table. My papa told stories about his childhood in Indiana, where he was often hungry and scavenging with his older brother for something to eat. It seemed strange and terribly unfair that he didn't have a father, and his mother couldn't get a job that paid enough to live on, so they were often without any food. Papa and his older brother walked to the pool hall each week so they could crawl under the building and look for coins. The men carried change in their pockets that they used to place bets while they were drinking beer and playing pool. Occasionally, a penny fell through the cracks between the floorboards and into the dirt below, sometimes a nickel or even a dime. When my papa and his brothers had 7 cents, they could buy a quart of milk with cream on the top, a packet of sugar, and a box of cornflakes. Boxes of cereal were bigger than, my papa said, and packed to the brim. He and his brother would take the milk, sugar, and cereal home and eat it all in one sitting. He told me it tasted like the very best thing in the world. Papa's mother would leave a bowl of white rice for him and his brother to eat for dinner while she was at work. Papa said the rice never filled him up, only made him feel more hungry. He would refuse to eat rice for the rest of his life. When Nana and I went to have lunch at the local Chinese restaurant, he wouldn't go. He said you couldn't pay him to eat rice ever again. One winter, when my papa was a boy, an older lady who lived down the street slipped and fell on the ice. My papa helped her get up and gather her things, and after he walked her home, she invited him to come to her house later that week so she could properly thank him. When he returned, she had made him a dinner of meatloaf with potatoes and green beans. And after dinner, there was a plate of cookies. He said it was like Christmas, the kind of Christmas that other people had, rich people. My papa and his brother were saved from poverty when some cousins came to get them. He wasn't sure how it had been arranged, but he and his brother got into a truck one day without their mother and rode in the back all the way to Yakima, Washington, where an aunt and uncle lived on a farm and ran a small hotel. My papa was 12 years old. Instead of going to school, he and his brother went to work each day. They mended fences, scrubbed floors, hauled wood, planted, weeded, milked cows, dug potatoes, and picked fruit during the summers. Papa worked hard all day, Monday through Saturday, but he was grateful to have plenty of food. Meat and potatoes, he said, bread with butter, vegetables and fruit, and some kind of cake or pie with every single Sunday dinner. He never said if he missed his mother, only that she had to give he and his brother up in order to get them fed. When my Nana made cookies, my papa would bite into one and tell us how he couldn't have imagined back when he was a boy having the things that we had, like butter, cream, eggs, and sugar, let alone chocolate chips. There was something especially significant for him about cookies and something almost miraculous about chocolate chips. As I was growing up, I associated chocolate chip cookies with a sense of pleasure and comfort. Some of my best childhood memories were steeped in the aroma of chocolate chip cookies baking in the oven. I remember sitting with my grandparents and chatting about my school day, listening to music on the radio while eating cookies, relishing the sense of well-being, warmth, and love. My Nana made her cookies with Nestle's chocolate chips. The chocolate morsels came in a bright yellow plastic bag with a picture of a cookie on the front and a recipe on the back. When my Nana unpacked the yellow crinkly package from the grocery bag, my papa would grin and say, "By gory, look at that," as if he were always amazed, surprised that they were there. So I went to college in 1979, unaware of what was happening in Central America. It had never occurred to me to think about where the ingredients for processed food items like chocolate chips, came from. Not until I met my roommate, whose father was a doctor who regularly volunteered in Central America, providing infant and maternal health care through various missions and an organization called Doctors Without Borders, which I had never heard of. Beth had accompanied her father several times to places like Guatemala and Honduras. She spoke fluent Spanish and did a lot of translating alongside the nurses and doctors who worked in the clinics. Through Beth, I was introduced to organizations like Doctors Without Borders and Amnesty International and learned about the exploitation and atrocities taking place in Central America, including the aggressive marketing of infant formula by the Nestle Corporation to poor women. I read and heard firsthand accounts of women picking cocoa beans in grueling conditions and then being paid too little to live on, while also being persuaded to buy and feed their babies formula instead of breastfeeding. The infant mortality rate had gone up after mothers began using formula. Health workers explained that there were two problems in Central America where infant formula was concerned. One, the women didn't always have access to clean water, and two, they often couldn't afford to buy an adequate amount of formula, so they diluted it. Consequently, babies were dying of a combination of disease from contaminated water and malnutrition. I went home over winter break and informed my family of what I had learned. I described the poverty and atrocious conditions people lived and worked in, the power that Nestle had over thousands of poor people, and declared we weren't buying Nestle products anymore, including, of course, their chocolate chips. My family was taken aback. This was not what they had expected me to learn about in college. My Nana asked questions. Why hadn't she heard about these awful things on the news? How was such criminal behavior allowed? She didn't understand. Surely there was some other explanation. I didn't have enough of an understanding to explain it. My papa quietly got up, went into the bedroom, and didn't come back out that evening. I stayed at my grandparents' house for several days, and a sense of disappointment, even quiet devastation, permeated the house. My Nana baked, but she didn't bake cookies. I felt confused and lost, like I had somehow ruined my grandparents' happiness. One evening before I left to go back to college, my Nana called me into the living room to show me a Nestle commercial on TV. It portrayed a smiling white mother with her little girl baking, and then the two of them sitting down at their kitchen table, biting into and savoring Nestle chocolate chip cookies together. I still remember my Nana telling me in a reassuring voice, the same voice she had used when I was much younger and had wakened in the night from a nightmare. See, Coley? Nestle wouldn't do anything terrible to people. They love their families too. I wanted so much to believe and be reassured by her, but knew that I couldn't. Looking back, I realized how much my papa must have identified with the stories I told of mothers working hard but being paid too little, and children who were malnourished or even starving to death. How painful it must have been for my grandparents to think they had enjoyed something at other people's expense. My papa would soon develop a number of health problems that the doctors told him were a direct result of his childhood malnutrition. In my junior year, I spent a term in San Francisco and discovered Ghirardelli chocolate. More significantly, I discovered Ghirardelli chocolate chips. I bought several packages to take home as gifts. My Nana promptly baked a batch of cookies with them. Finding the chocolate chips was a stroke of luck, one that allowed me to give back what I felt I had taken from my papa, the simple pleasure of chocolate chip cookies. In college, I learned that there were ways to find out about where my food was coming from and how it was made and marketed. From my family, I learned how emotional and complex our relationship with food can be, and that not everyone has the money or time to even consider these things. Over the years, when I'm in the baking aisle in the grocery store, I can't help but notice the bags of chocolate chips. They still remind me to this day of my papa, my roommate, my college years, and the difficulty I experienced in figuring out what to do with what I was learning. I'm also reminded that I continue to have the responsibility and the enormous good fortune to choose what food I buy, whether it comes in a bright yellow bag or not. Thank you.
Hello, I am Anna Kreutz. I graduated from LeGrand High School last year and have been taking a gap year and traveling and exploring myself and the world. Last summer, I worked at Evergreen Family Farm. So that's kind of why I'm here. So thank you, Sarah. I have to admit, I'm pretty impressed that this is the first public speaking that I've been to since COVID. And the fact that I'm speaking at it is really nerve-wracking for me. But I'm just gonna tell some stories from me. But let's just say that I was an odd duckling growing up in my household. I would freak out when my father would throw a banana peel in the garbage can instead of my compost pile. Or I would go through and pick out all the burnables and burn them in the backyard. I would let all of the sunflowers that were volunteering grow and would defend them with my life from my dad. My parents thought that all of my vegetables were strange and unconsumable, like my kohlrabi and white icicle radishes. But it was simply doing what made sense to me. And I wasn't taught those things, but I don't know why. I just was just different. And so when my dad came home from work one day saying that there was some hippies with a farm and a greenhouse down the road, I was like, what? Like just down the road? And he's like, yeah. He's like, you should go check them out. I think you would like them. I wasn't too surprised by his remark, but I was aghast at the fact that there was a small organic farm in my hometown. So a few weeks later, I rode my bike down and found the greenhouses. And of course, Nick and Sarah were outside on a peaceful evening. And from right then and there, I was in love. For me, it was like seeing a celebrity. All the videos and books, and I had read about organic small farms. I had written so many essays and reports on it growing up in high school. And I got to see it in my own neighborhood. We became friends, and I would see Sarah at thrift stores and would get so excited. And eventually I got invited to share a meal, and I was so excited and honored. At this point last year, I was beginning to work a few hours at the farm. I was very stressed because I was working through online classes to graduate a year early. It was such a relief to go to work. It wasn't work. It was like meditation. And after graduation, I got to feel that relief every day. I remember one of the first few weeks living at the farm. I was sitting on the couch on a beautiful evening, listening to the birds and staring out the window, when I heard Nick start singing a song. Oh, the summertime is coming. The trees are sweetly blooming, and the wild mountain thyme grows around the bloomin' heather. Will you go, lassie, go, to pick wild mountain thyme? It was a simple moment that made me feel more peaceful and happy than I had for years. What Evergreen Family Farm did for me was beyond a job. They taught me what was important in life, the simple things, the little moments. They taught me to chase my dreams, and I didn't feel out of place there. All the things I valued in life were the same here. I didn't have to defend myself or explain myself. I wasn't taught about the give and take of what a community is and what makes a community unified. But Sarah's definition of community and taught me so much about that. So being at the farm taught me about involvement. I hadn't really thought about what was a community, and you just go to the store and get what you need. And oh, that sounds like something fun that's going on downtown. Let's go. But I got to be part of that. I got to be part of the farmers market and to see and grow food, and give it to the people around me and meet so many people through that. It really showed me how much there is in our community. It was very inspiring. There's something amazing about laboring over little plants to become bigger and healthier, to harvest them and then share them with the community to make it healthier and happier. The value of community was ingrained in me with that time at Evergreen Family Farm. My only wish is that I can take that with me even when I'm not working at the farm. But the lessons from food will always be remembered because food really is remarkable and everlasting. Everything we eat and consume has a history to it, from the small short time history to the long ancient history in which we've been eating and growing food for many centuries. My goal is to know as much possible about that history. Farmers market is a great way to connect with the food growers and get connected with them. But that's only a small proportion of what we eat. I recently got to work trade at an organic orange farm in Valencia region of Spain. It was called Villajanto. I know we don't live in the most temperate place, so I try not to discredit Eastern Oregon too much. But at this communal, we ate 90% local organic fresh food, and that 10% was bought in at a local market that was traded for oranges that we picked. I was amazed at the fact that no money was exchanged for the food that about 20 people ate. Of course, the cookies were the first thing gone because they were the best. It was so invigorating to be able to sit down and ask where this came from. Ulysses, the man running it, could always tell me. I felt so inspired by their systems and ways of caring and serving the planet. We did several ceremonies in celebration of the earth and its gifts. We had a ceremony for the sun when I was there, which gives us life. Being thankful for our resources is so important. If we feel gratitude for what we have, the sun, the moon, the earth, rain, water, people, then they'll continue to serve us. Because it's springtime, I get so inspired by the summertime. I can never, it's just so exciting that you get to plant little seedlings in the ground and you have to wait all summer, it feels like, to get something. And I've heard so many times recently, because I've been prompting people, grow plants, it's so easy, just put some seeds in the ground and take care of them. But there's many people that make the excuse that our growing season is too short. But from someone that's almost born and raised here, it's all I've ever known. I love this valley and all that it provides, and I've never had a problem growing tomatoes. And yes, if you've lived somewhere else, you may be aghast at the fact that you wait all summer for them to turn red, and it feels like days later when they freeze. But Eastern Oregon is such a special place, and it's becoming more and more aware and up to date with the times. There's been change occurring slowly and surely in the grand. Coming from a young generation, I'm very excited. I hope in time that more people will be aware of our small farms and get involved in whatever way they can. I thank you all for serving our community and by being here tonight. I can't wait to see where this meeting leads and who gets inspired. I know in time that'll make a difference, and I hope that we can all remember what is said tonight, and I thank you guys for your time.
A little more conversational. Does that work? took a little coaxing for me to be here. So, but thanks for the invitation, and yeah, we'll see how this goes. So in the 1980s, my family fed people. My parents and both sets of grandparents were farmers and gardeners. They raised a diversity of crops from corn and soybeans and wheat and hogs and cattle, and they had really large productive gardens. My grandma Vera, she was the head of the altar society for the Catholic Church, St. Joseph, which was built with the limestone from the bluffs in Illinois, where I'm from. She was in charge of coordinating and preparing all of the funeral meals, as well as community food for community events. And she was a lunch lady, and she was a farmer. My grandpa, in order to make ends meet, my grandpa was a construction worker, and he moonlighted as a farmer. But grandma was definitely a super important part of that. She like kept everything running. So somewhere around 1985, my parents were told by the Farm Service Agency that they weren't going to give my parents any more operational loans. So like thousands of other farmers during the 80s farm crisis, my parents auctioned off the farm. Fortunately, my parents are still alive. Many farmers ended their lives as a result. So my dad took a job a few hours away selling corn and soybean seed, still in Illinois. And my family no longer lived on a farm, though we lived in the country. We were surrounded by corn and soybean fields. And we were really part of the farming process. You know, my dad, you had to buy the seed from someone. And as a young girl, the setting didn't really change all that much. It was still it felt like I was on a farm. And on school days off, my brother and I would help my dad install the seed signs. If you've ever traveled to the Midwest, which is full of corn and soybean fields, some of the fields are lined with big signs that highlight what hybrid variety they've planted there. So my dad had to put those signs up. And so I learned at a very young age how to use a post driver, and we would hang up those hybrid variety signs. And we hung out in warehouses where there was a ton of corn seed, these bags. They don't use bags anymore, but at the time they used to use bags. And seed bags would rip, and there'd be all this corn around, and there was a really specific smell to the corn. And it didn't smell natural, right? It was coated, all of the corn was coated in this weird red seed coating, and it had a particular smell, and it would rub off on your hands. But still, our family was part of growing food, and our family still gardened a ton. And I spent a big chunk of my summers at my grandparents' house, both sides, but especially at Grandma Vera's. I always loved it because she still had a really big garden, and helped her, work up strawberries, and she would tell her stories. And my family, this part of Illinois, is a pretty insulated German community. It's tucked between the limestone bluffs of this driftless, non-glaciated area of Illinois and the bottoms, as we called them, otherwise known as floodplains. And, everything was tucked up in the hollers. I don't know how old I was before I realized I didn't know that holler and hollow were the same word. But still, the hollers. And so the county is a peninsula that is on one side. On the east side is the Illinois River, and on the west side is the Mississippi River. So as you can imagine, the Mississippi floods, and our communities in that county are truly stuck between a rock and a hard place when it floods, because there's nowhere for the water to go except for into the communities. So some of you might be old enough and might recall the Great Flood of 1993. And I was in middle school, spent the whole summer sandbagging, and the National Geographic did an article about the flood. And in that article, my grandma Vera is noted to what she contributed. Their farm flooded, but their house didn't flood. And she gave away pickled beets and brownies, and certainly comfort food for this German farming community. So it definitely felt like our family was still feeding people. I didn't live on a farm, but we still, that was a big part of our lives. That all said, I was certainly never encouraged to go into farming. I love sports, and I decided to go to school for a physical therapy. And then a good friend of ours is actually my husband's college roommate, Tim Coogan. He's like, you got to take this environmental studies course. It's really great. The professor is awesome. It's just like super worth it. I was like, okay, it was going to be an elective for me. And then I took the class and I was like, wow, you can study the land. You can spend time outside. You can be active, like sign me up. I want to do that. And there was an environmental science major at the university where I went. Interestingly, that choice wasn't much different in my parents' eyes than choosing farming. They're like, what are you going to do with that degree? That's a whole nother story. But interesting, in that education where I was studying environmental science, ecology, environmental science was absolutely not connected, in my experience in academia, to agriculture. Growing up as a farm kid, this was weird to me. I was like, why aren't they like mingling? There was no mingling. And not only were they not connected, they were at odds with each other, and they weren't even at the same university, right? Like I went to University of Iowa, and all the ag stuff was at Iowa State at the land grant. And so this division just never sat well with me, never made sense to me. So I just kind of started trying to find people like who's bringing these worlds together. I'm not the first one to have asked these questions. So I started reading a ton of Wendell Berry, back in the days when we would go to a library, and maybe we still do, but like find one author and then you sit cross-legged in the aisle of the library and have that library smell. And then I'd pick up Wes Jackson, who was nearby, the author Wes Jackson, who is nearby Wendell Berry, and learn about the Land Institute in Kansas and just all of the work that they're doing. And it just was fascinating. It was really great. And I was in love and still am in love with ecology. And so much that I earned my middle and high school science teaching credentials so that I could teach it. And then I ended up attending grad school, and I researched how insect and plants responded to varying levels of grazing. I was really grateful for this opportunity to bring those two worlds together in another environmental science program. So right before I started grad school in 2006, Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma came out. It blew my mind. It's like, okay, here I was, a child of a Midwestern farm, literally surrounded by by corn and soybeans until my mid-20s, never saw an ocean until I was 21. But I never somehow thought to ask the question, like, so what exactly happens to all this corn? I assumed it was feeding people. No. It made fuel and it fed animals who then got sick from eating the corn. And then we ate those sick animals. And I was like, oh, okay. And I actually read this. I was on summer break at my parents' house, like in one of the most productive, like corn producing regions in central Illinois. My parents had moved away from the Mississippi Valley. So insert more motivation to learn to grow food in new ways. And so I got my degree, but I also started farming. I was really hungry. I was like hungry to learn new ways, but new old ways, like all the different things. So I worked on the student organic farm in grad school. I apprenticed on a biodynamic farm in the Bitterroot Valley. And then my husband and I, we moved to Wisconsin, where I got to grow food in a variety of ways, including like a 900-member CSA farm, community supported agriculture farm, down to getting to coordinate and manage 5 school gardens for a school district. So certainly in those experiences, the needle's moving, right? The needle's moving in a more sustainable direction in agriculture. But even some of the most devout organic sustainable farms that are really upheld as examples of sustainability, something just still has never really set. We intensively start plants from seed, we turn over the soil, and my eyes and ears are constantly being opened or wanting to be open for better ways to feed people. And on the local food scene, I started to hear bits and pieces about the work that the Oneida tribe was doing up near Green Bay. They're growing, preserving, and selling their first foods, the foods that they have been survived off of since time immemorial. And regretfully, I never went to their store because my family moved here. So we ended up moving to Northeast Oregon, and I resigned from my work on the farm and at the school district in Wisconsin. And then I moved here. I was like, what am I going to do here? I don't know. I sometimes still don't know. But so there was somebody encouraged me to go to Journal Club. As some of you might be familiar with, it's also known as the Eastern Ecology Forum. So that's where it's a series of talks that are led by local and regional scientists. And there I listened to a talk among many really great talks. One that was by Cheryl Shippentauer from the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation and Brian Indress. They were sharing about the tribe's first foods upland vision. And the document was also authored by Eric Klemps and Sean Steinmetz. So the tribe in 2007, they created a mission for their Department of Natural Resources that was first foods focused, specifically first foods that were served at their tribal meals. And that vision is to ensure healthy, resilient, and dynamic upland ecosystems capable of providing first foods that sustain the continuity of the tribe's culture. I read the article, which you can all find if you just Google like CTUIR, Upland First Food Vision, or River Vision. Both of those documents come up. And I felt like I wasn't reading a scientific document. I felt like I was reading poetry. And I was blown away, frankly, by the documents. They weave ecology, food procurement, culture, geology, and philosophy all into one. And reciprocity is really at the center of those visions. They take care of what takes care of them, their first foods. And I forget, I think it might be both of the documents, but the abundance of the first foods is not by accident. It's quoted in there that the people of CTUIR actively managed landscapes for the sustained production of first foods and their resources. So it was the first time that I had ever even considered like the productivity of the lands wasn't by accident. That it wasn't the hand-to-mouth hunter-gatherer perspective that has been perpetuated. That they actually never separated ecology and agriculture to begin with. And it's new to me. And maybe it's not new to others, but it's certainly new to me as somebody whose life had those two worlds separated. So I'm a beginner, I'm a learner, I'm an admirer. And there's no tidy ending to this story. I keep learning, as I think a lot of us do, and seeing lots of familiar faces, lots of growth mindsets up there. And this guidance that I feel like the tribe has offered, maybe peripherally because it's for them, but we can learn a whole lot from what they're doing, is a huge part of a project that I get to be a part of. And in my role in this community has kind of been coalescing into the Kapkapnim Walla or Grand Ronde Community Science Project, where we're engaging youth in watershed monitoring. And there are a few goals of that project, which is of course to engage youth in watershed monitoring, but also to be guided by our Indigenous neighbors and to amplify their voice in this valley. I feel really grateful and privileged to be able to coordinate the effort. And it's in partnership with the Grand Ronde Model Watershed. And props to Kayla Morinaga, who can't be here. There's actually a Model Watershed board meeting tonight. And she's been there. Kayla is their monitoring coordinator. And she's just been incredible. But also a shout out to Brosnan Spencer and Bobby Fossick, who are Indigenous folks who are doing incredible work in our valley. And then also Winix Red Elk and Linda Sampson for, their collaboration and guidance of the project is priceless and really deep and meaningful. And though there's no tidy ending to this, I think what I'm gaining and part of my story is just that increased curiosity, like beyond curiosity, like curiosity that I've never really like a hunger, a hunger for it and an inspiration to keep learning and share in that learning. But the question remains, how can we keep learning how to cultivate food in ways that brings us together? And this is the part that when I think about like my grandma Vera and all of the things that she and that community cultivated, there's so much community around food. So how can we cultivate food in ways that brings us together, keeps our waters clean, is resilient in the face of climate change, and also deeply nourishes us? Like those are really big asks. And despite our country's efforts to eradicate their people and their ways, our Indigenous neighbors are doing these things. And they've been doing them since time immemorial. They haven't stopped. So they are an incredible inspiration on this pretty incredible journey. So to be continued.
That'd be great. Thank you. Blessed is the humble home nestled in the mud, sanctified and self-relied, built because she could. Never had no ring, no such child. 20 kids or 10 chicks, that pussy running wild. How to be the name, when to be the style. All hail, Lady Canyon Pile. Blessed are the meek who reap from the vine. Mixed greens and fresh meat, that's where I go and get mine. Fix you up, man, send you on your way. Hear the pagan people pray. Hallowed be the name, windy be the style. All hail, Lady Canyon Pile. Hallowed be the name, windy be the style. All hail, Lady Canyon Pile.
So I'd like to give Greg Rollins another round of applause. Thank you very much. And I'd like to invite Candy Nielsen to the stage to talk a little bit about Farmers Market. Welcome.
No tripping. Okay. Hi, everyone. Some of you know me, a lot of you do not, but you will. My name is Candy, and I've grown up in this area since about the 4th grade. Grew up out in Union on about a 12-acre farm, lots of chickens and lambs and piglets and garden and honeybees, the whole 9 yards. And I remember being probably in middle school and making weekly treks into the farmer's market when it used to be over by Sunflower Books, the old Sunflower Books. And my mom started selling honey there, things like that. That's kind of really got me interested into seeing the connection between putting up with bee stings and the fruit of my labors afterwards, so, and always fascinating the little kids that would come to the farm to look at the beehives and holding the little drone bees in my hand, saying they thought I was a magical like queen bee of some kinds. They wouldn't sting me, but little do they know drones don't sting. So, but I've spent 4 years being the assistant manager of the farmer's market. And then an opportunity came up and I jumped on it to be the farmer's market manager this year. So that's where I am. I think I might have a little bit of insanity like in my DNA, but because I work a full-time job on top of it, but I think you have to have a little crazy to do what you got to do. So, a lot of times at the market, and around the area, I hear the word local or locally sourced, or what does local mean? So that's why I kind of thought I'd do a little blurb on. Plus, I'm going to do a shameless plug for the market, of course, because if I don't, I would be in trouble. So when you think about it, think about the word, what is local mean to you? Just kind of keep that in your mind as you're listening. I know 50 years ago, about 70% of the products found in grocery stores were either grown, produced, or processed within 100 miles of the store. That's just how it was. But today, the food Americans consume has traveled, on average, 1,500 miles before reaching the plate the person's can eat it. So what happened to local food in today's global market? There have been movements around local food, or what we have learned is called locavore. And it's a lifestyle that's kind of on the rise. You may have heard terms like farm to table. That's a big popular kind of buzz term going around. We can probably all agree that local food often refers to seasonal, fresh, tasty, healthy, sustainable food, kind of other words that go with it. But if you ask for the definition of local food, what would you say? So as it turns out, there's not really an official definition of local food. But there are ways that the concept is defined, and one of them is through what's called food miles. So local food can be defined by the distance between where the food was grown and where it is sold or consumed. So according to a definition adopted by the US Congress, blah, 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 they say that the total distance that a product can be transported and still considered to be locally or regionally produced is less than 400 miles from its origin or within the state which it's produced. However, the common definition used by the general population considers food local as if it was grown within 100 miles. There's definitely a dichotomy going on there. There's also a concept called direct sales to customers or consumers. So some people, and I've heard this a lot, define local food as produce directly bought from the farm, either at a farm itself or at a farmer's market. And what's kind of I found this interesting, is that the number of farmers markets is steadily rising. Back in 1994, the number of farmers markets nationwide was only about 1,755, about 1,700. It jumped up to 2,700 in 1998. And the last data I could find was in 2009, it was clear up to 5,274. So I can imagine it's even exponentially higher than that. And then the last little concept I keep hearing a lot about is something called ecology dimensions. So still others refer to the characteristics of the environment where the food is grown when defining local food. Let's say, like, for example, that a specific region, the food is grown in climate A with soil type B, watershed type system type C, species type D, blah, blah, blah. So any food produced in that same environment would be considered local to that region. So those are some of the concepts that I kind of found. So I want you to again think about, what does local food mean to you personally? I myself really thought about this and pondered it and thought, how would I define it myself? So I've chosen to kind of define my meaning of local food in the following way. Local food means to me that the producer provides an option for their consumers to be connected to the source of where it comes from. The source is then transparent, and they make a conscious effort in choosing to grow food with the good of all in mind. Local food allows people to honor, celebrate, and choose to grow food with the good of all in mind. Local food allows people to honor and again celebrate and support the huge undertaking that's required from a farmer to produce things right way and share it with people in the area that need it. So local food would then means better options for everybody, from the original source to the end consumer. And to me, local food is a process that allows the betterment of lives in every step of the way. And then I want you to show you, it's kind of hard to see up here, but I want to show you a few things of what I felt like local looks like to me. This picture here is a picture of Sarah, Nick, and their beautiful little girl, Sadie. This is what local looks like to me. This is a wonderful, beautiful family that lives here right in our valley, grows and produces things with the utmost care as stewards of the planet and of their space that they've been given and gifted. And they really think about it, and they really strive to do things they feel is the right way and give back. And then there's another picture, and it's kind of hard to see. This is Nella May Parks. Many of you know her. She has a beautiful farm out in Cove. I talked to her really quickly. She grows food outside and inside hoop houses, and kind of allows her to expand through her season, make it a little larger. She says that she loves the creativity of farming and being connected to the land in every way she can and every day. And the most meaningful parts of farming for her are feeding and employing the people, connecting the community, sharing her knowledge, and helping new and beginning farmers. This is what local looks like to me. And one more, this gentleman here, I just call him Mr. Martinez. I'm sure he has a first name, but I don't call it. I call him Mr. Martinez out of respect. They have a beautiful farm called M&J Martinez Farm. It's in Milton Freewater, which is a good, 45 miles one way from us. So, think about that. They're a multi-generational farm. They produce fruit, produce, flowers, so much more. They take a lot of pride themselves in producing food free of pesticides. It's a big deal for them, and they harvest a lot by hand, and you do use some small equipment. They believe that they are responsible for being the best caretakers of the land they occupy and provide quality food to their consumers. So once again, this is what local looks like. Okay. So in those three pictures, by no means what every farmer producer I've ever met at farmers market. There are so many. That's just a tiny smidgen. Let's see. LeGrand's Farmers Market is located right here, of course, in beautiful Eastern Oregon. It's a seasonal open air market, which features lots of produce, baked goods, specialty foods, eggs, garden products, arts, crafts, music that's live, and so much more. And thankfully, with the COVID kind of restrictions being lifted and everything, the season will look a little more normal this year. So lots of live music, events are happening again, lots and lots of vendors. It's one of those things that I call my weekly pilgrimage, and I go down there, and of course I'm in charge this time, so hopefully everything goes without a hitch. But I want you just to think, our market is well over 40 years old. I think there's some discrepancy between 42 and 43 this year. Nobody wants to find the exact number, but just remember, here's my shameless plug. It runs Saturdays from 9 a.m. to noon, and it starts Saturday, May 21st. So I'd love to see you all down there. And then we also do run on Tuesdays from 3 to 6. We are going to be located again at our normal spot on the corner of 4th and Adams, and we'll run clear through to October 15th. So I hope you all see and come down and find out maybe a definition of what local looks like to you. Thank you.
Right up here. Hello. I'm going to put my glasses on. So I'm Robin Maley, and I'm here with my husband, Peter. We've been in LeGrand almost 13 years, and we moved from West Virginia
I work for Oregon State University Extension Service with Family and Community Health, and my program area, I've worked with the SNAP Ed program, which does nutrition education through low-income families and eligible populations around the county here and also Baker County. And so I see a lot of common themes in these stories, and I love going to the farmers markets. We have done, there was a Chef at the Market program a couple of years ago that I helped out with in collaboration with the WIC program. So it's really fun to be able to demonstrate food with people and have them sample lots of fruits and vegetables. So my story is called The Peanut Stew at Thorn Run Inn, and it's a story about food and connections and hospitality. So right after college, I went to Senegal, West Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer. And Senegal, it's known for its bright colored fabrics and amazing music and dancing and delicious food and its hospitality, which they call teranga. If you're visiting a village, you'll often be offered food or tea, even as part of a welcome, even if they don't have very much to share with you. So I lived in a small village about 4 kilometers from the main asphalt road. And so I'd get there by, walking down a sand track, because Senegal is very dry and hot. But in the rainy season, when they grow crops, it looks lush, and there are seasonal ponds, and it's very green and beautiful. But in the dry season, it's really hard to imagine food growing. So the primary food crop is millet, and so that's what we'd have for most of our lunches or breakfasts and dinners, with a bean or leaf sauce with it. Occasionally meat, but not very much, because that was more of a luxury. And the farmers grow peanuts as their cash crop. They bring the peanuts to a central area after they grow them, and to a cooperative, and they sell them, and then they make peanut butter or peanut oil out of them, which they sell to other countries. And they do keep some of the peanuts at home for their own food supply, but mostly those peanuts would be saved for next year's crop. So as a cash crop, the money that they get from this, they will use to buy things like vegetables, which they can't grow there because it's too dry. They just can't afford to use that much water to grow vegetables. They would also buy tea and sugar, which is the tea ceremony is a really important part of the culture there. If you can't have tea, then you really don't have money. They use the money to buy clothes. They also pay for school fees, or they buy medicine with their cash crop from peanuts. So one season I bought the seeds to plant a field. So they kind of joked about it. It was my peanut field. I weeded occasionally, and I helped with the harvest, but mostly the family I lived with took care of it. And they tilled the field with a horse-drawn plow. And they planted the seeds, and then they used a hoe with a little angular metal end to weed around it, because the weeds will grow anywhere. And to harvest the plants, you pull up the whole plant, and the seeds grow or the pods grow underneath the ground. So you shake off the sand, and the pods are separated from the plant. And like I said, those that are not sold, they save for the next year. So one of my favorite dishes in Senegal, and for many people visiting there, is called peanut stew. And they serve it over rice. And they don't grow rice in most of the country. They grow it in the southern part, in the Casamance, but not in the dry northern part. But it's more of a town food than a village food, because of the processing that you need to make it into peanut butter. Also because we don't have a lot of vegetables in the village, and meat's kind of scarce. So if you're making this mafe, this peanut stew, you'd need onions, and you'd need tomatoes or tomato paste. You would need peppers or a pepper sauce to go with it. And when you saute the onions, and then you add the tomatoes, and you add the peanut butter, and the peanut butter thickens it. So it's turned into this like deliciously smelling thick sauce that you can add vegetables to it, or meat, chicken or beef or goat, which was pretty common there. The vegetables I would put in it would be carrots or sweet potatoes or eggplants. So it's a wonderful combination of colors and flavors and textures too. So a traditional meal might just have the chicken or goat without vegetables, but the best dish has a variety of a mixture of both. So because the dish is so delicious, when I returned back to the US, it was one of those things that I would make for family and friends when we had gatherings. It's also really easy to serve, and it doesn't cost very much, because peanut butter is one of those commodity foods. So it's, it's an easy way to like introduce people to a food that they wouldn't normally eat. So I met my husband through Peace Corps, another part of the story. We had both served in Senegal and at different times, but we shared a love of the food and culture from Senegal. After we got married, we had jobs in Washington, D.C. They were fascinating, but it kept us apart for a couple months out of each year. So one winter we were on furlough from our government jobs, and we got this book, How to Run a Bed and Breakfast. But just, we got this idea that maybe we should do that. And for a year, he would ask me like every weekend when we were like just hanging out, it's like, so have we bought a farm yet? Well, we did. Eventually we did, but that is another story. But we bought a farm in the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia. So we lived in an 1870s brick farmhouse. We had 20 acres of our own land, and there were hills and forests around it. It was in the Ridge and Valley area of West Virginia. And it was really beautiful and very quiet. We ran an eco-friendly bed and breakfast inn, and I was the cook. So I didn't have any formal training, but I do like to cook. We were business owners and parents of 2 young boys at the time, and trying to make a living with unsalaried jobs. A little challenging, a little stressful. We had an orchard with apple, cherry, and pear trees, and I used those a lot in the cooking that I did. I had a large garden area that I never really found time to cultivate as well as I would have liked to. So our goal, and this is where it kind of ties into some of these other stories, was to serve locally sourced organic meals. But we soon realized that we couldn't do that. Our neighboring farmers were growing corn and hay for their cows, but they were not producing organically grown foods or the kinds of food that we would need to put on the table for breakfast or other meals. We could buy organic foods, but we would have to go to a larger urban area, which was about 2 to 3 hours away. And that was too far and too costly to do that. We wanted to encourage families to come visit us at our farm. It was a kid-friendly, dog-friendly. So we wanted it also to be affordable so that if we wanted to go to a place like that, we could do it. So we focused on preparing homemade, healthy foods that used locally available fruits and vegetables. Well, most of the meals that I made at the bed and breakfast inn, let's see, most of them were breakfasts. I did make dinners because we're about a half an hour from any town. So people would come out and we'd serve family style, and we'd put all the dishes out, and they would only have one choice. And I would tell them beforehand what the choice was. And if they didn't want that, then they could go somewhere else. But I often made the mafe, this peanut stew, because it was easy to make and it was unique, and people would find a different experience and an unexpected one in West Virginia. Nobody else was making peanut stew. So another scene or stage here. As part of our eco-friendly marketing goals, we had an ecotourism workshop at our bed and breakfast inn. And this brought in friends and colleagues from Washington, D.C., where he'd worked before. And we had a guest speaker come from Mexico who was working with an ecotourism project. And then we had faculty and students from West Virginia University, because they have a recreation, parks, and tourism department there. And what I did is I made the peanut stew for this group. And so they thought it was unique and liked it. And I was, it was a happy event. But years later, here we are in LeGrand, and I had invited a new EOU faculty member and her family over to visit, to welcome her to the community. And I knew that she had been a student at West Virginia University at one time, and we likely had some friends and colleagues in common, because when Peter and I finally sold the B&B, we went back to school at WVU. And I was working in that school where they had the Parks and Rec department, and we spent 4 years in Morgantown. Beautiful place. Anyways, so we're sitting in our backyard with our new friends, chatting about work and school and the places we had visited. And we'd already talked about our time in Morgantown, and we mentioned that we ran a bed and breakfast inn in West Virginia. And then our guest said, "Oh, I went to an ecotourism conference at a B&B. And I had a delicious West African peanut stew while I was there. And there was a guy named Peter." And so I looked at my husband and my other friends, and by then we knew, "You came to my place and I made that dish for you." And there we were 20 years later talking about peanut stew at Thorn Run Inn. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Merlin Baker. I have Merlin's Catering. I've lived in the Valley for 25 years, give or take. And I used to have a restaurant called Foley Station. I've been in the food service industry for 50 years and have traveled all over our country from the Caribbean to Alaska and had many experiences of which I'd like to share one. This story is called A Pond of Biscuits. So at one point in my life, a younger, freer time, I spent some time in the Caribbean. And while I was down there, I was the chef on a yacht for a Cuban gentleman and worked as a waiter in a couple of different hotels. One was run by a local person, and it was all outdoors. It was a beautiful space. The kitchen was extremely small and just a little shack. And all of the tables were outside with pergola and growing tropical plants. In any case, that experience went by the wayside, and I headed back to the United States on my way to the West Coast. When I came into Florida on my flight, which was very complicated, but yet another story, that happened to be the year that there were a lot of Cuban refugees and a lot of problems. And I was not aware of any of that. That was beyond my scope of interest. But I arrived and with my backpack in November and my thumb, and proceeded to try to hitchhike to the West Coast. Well, the hardest part happened to be just getting from the airport to the outskirts of Miami, because no one wanted to pick me up. Obviously, with 200 unsolved homicides in Miami that year, everyone was afraid. So a few coins into the city bus, and a while later, I ended up on the edge of town and taking my trip proceeded. Many, many rides, many stories along the trip. It was only took 3 days to get to California from Miami. But nonetheless, one story involved an interesting experience in Louisiana. So being the hippie I was at the time, and being in a Southern Baptist region of Louisiana, I had my thumb out hoping for a ride, and a gentleman with a Volkswagen Rabbit pulled over and decided that he would offer me a ride. His son was sitting on the passenger seat. He was sitting neatly tucked behind the steering wheel, slightly obese, just barely enough room to steer, and pulled over and opened the door and promptly said to me, you're not gay, are you? And where are you headed? I said, I'm just headed down the road. I said, no, I said, I'm not gay, and I'm just headed down the road. He said, okay, then you can get in. So he grabbed his son, who was about 5 years old, and somehow squeezed him in between the steering wheel and where he was seated. And so his son was sitting on his lap while he's driving down the road. And I got in the car. We started out. And he said to me, he said, well, God told me I need to share the gospel with you. I said, okay, that's fine. He said, so we started down the road, and he started sharing, and I started listening. And he asked me at one point, he said, so what do you do? where are you going? Tell me your story. And I said, well, I was cooking in the Caribbean and I'm headed west. I don't know where it's going to all end up, but I'm a chef. He said, oh, he said, I love food. And quickly it turned from the gospel to the gospel of food. So our conversation continued and he said, you know what? He said, God has moved me to offer to buy you lunch. So he said, if you will bear with me, I'd like to drop my son off at home and then I'll buy you lunch. And little did he know that I had a real strong aversion to fast food and that I had a lot of respect for organic and natural things. But out of just thankfulness, I went along with the whole process. So when we came out, he came out of the house and we got in the car. He said, I'll drive you, whatever, 40 miles down the road. We just have lunch and he'll do his thing. So anyway, we went to Wendy's and somehow in the process, he ordered a triple with everything on it and drove until the entire sandwich was gone without dripping a drop or losing a bite with one hand. I was quite impressed. So we're driving down the road and the eating was done. There was time to talk. And he said, so what do you cook? I said, well, I cook pretty much everything. He said, do you like biscuits? I said, I love biscuits. Biscuits are great. Yeah, I love biscuits. He said, I love biscuits. You know, my mom made great biscuits. My grandma made great biscuits. And my wife makes incredible biscuits. She makes those ones that for company, you know, where she spends a lot of time and she folds the dough and the butter's real thin. And then she cuts them out with the cutter. She puts them in the pan and they bake and you can see through the window as they're rising up and the butter's oozing out the sides. And then they come out of the oven golden brown and they're steaming and you can't even hardly not want one right now. And then she makes those little ones that are sort of crispy on the outside and buttery inside. And they're like the ones she makes really fast when she's late coming home from work for making dinner. Okay. He says, it doesn't matter. I love them all. And he says, how do you eat biscuits? Well, I said, I eat biscuits, you know, like some butter on them, maybe some good jam or that's my favorite, really, you know, maybe some sausage gravy. He says, oh, sausage gravy, that's great. But he said, my favorite way to eat biscuits. He says, you're not from down here, are you? I said, no, I'm from Minnesota. He said, you know what thick syrup is? I said, not exactly. He said, it's molasses. Thick syrup is molasses. He said, my favorite way to eat biscuits is I wait till the very end of the meal when everything is eaten. And then I put a dollop of thick syrup right in the middle of the plate. And, you know, we have that heavy cream. Oh, I know what heavy cream is. My mom used to buy milk from the farmer, local farmer, and we'd get heavy cream about 3 inches thick on the top of every gallon. There's nothing like it. He said, oh yeah, that heavy cream is so great. He'd get a picture of that heavy cream and draw a ring right around that thick syrup. He said, and then I line up about 6 biscuits on the back side of the plate. And I push them all in, see if I can eat them before they float across the other side. Pond of Biscuits.
Well,
Thank you so much. Now you see, we had to have him at the end because we're all going to be so hungry. We have to, like, go eat all of that and then go home and find some biscuits. So I just want to say thank you again to all of you. Again, I'm Laura Hudson. I'm interested in community storytelling, and that's my connection to this gig. But in my other lives, I also am a pastor, as Nancy said, and I also have a spirituality and story coaching business that I call Resilient Spirit. So I have the privilege of sharing I'm a pastor, so you got to have a benediction to like close out the thing. And Merlin just gave us the gospel of biscuits. So we're like in really good shape to have this benediction. So here's my kind of closing thing for you all that I came up with. We are those who hunger, and we are those who feed one another. The chocolate chip cookie fresh from the oven, the pickled beets in disaster zones, the salmon and its stream, her stream or his stream, feeding the people and the people nourishing the salmon. The farmer with the hands in the soil being soothed. The peanut stew hospitality brought home to the farm, hospitality offered again, brought home to Eastern Oregon. Hospitality offered again, connection full circle. Hitchhiking adventures meandering through Louisiana, the shrine of the biscuit, the pond of molasses, delectable delight, delicious sacrament. We are those who hunger for nourishment, for celebration, for honoring the local, for knowledge, for reciprocity, above all, for connection. We are those who feed others with favorite dishes, with stories, with empathy, with love. We are those who, as we feed others, are fed. We hunger, we feed, we are fed. Let it be. Be well. Thank you again. And I think we get a little bit more music. Is that the plan? Oh, okay. Well, did you have, yep. And I will say before we finish, Carrie had one little announcement just to plant some seeds. Or do you want me to go ahead and announce it? She is planning, as part of her work, she's planning a public lands day, and it's going to be in September. And it's going to be at probably Bird Track Springs. Is that what you said? And as part of that, she's going to be gathering stories. I don't know if that's fully fleshed out exactly how it's going to happen, but stories about public lands and your relationship with public lands. So put that in your little heads. You've got plenty of months to think about a story. And when you hear more information about that, go on out to Bird Track Springs and tell a story. All right. And be well.
Ooh, how you turn me around, spin me right out of my shoe, and cast a spell on me, render me unable to move, like a prison in a wild mire, little mental empire. And it's up with the day again, peeking through the slit of my blinds. And back under cover to wrestle with the weight of all time. My cabin on a mountain high, little mental empire. So come to me, honey, hold me close till the feeling is gone. A fear I can't tame or can't put my finger on. Right now she running wild, little mental empire.